Welcome everyone to my presentation. My name is Haggerson and the title of my talk is Strategies to Challenge Stereotypes and Embrace Shifting Identities. I've organized my talk in the following way. First, I will present a brief anecdote about my cross-cultural unit and how it emerged, and then I will go into the pedagogical and choices that I made along with the technology I used in the project, and then I'll look at the theoretical framework, and finally I will end with a conclusion and some thoughts on peace building through cross-cultural units. I'd like to begin by telling you an anecdote about how this unit organically arose from a conversation that I had with a co-teacher in Mexico. The title of the story is Echoes of the Water Drum, the Power of the Deer Dance. Anna, my collaborator in Mexico, asked me to teach a unit about Easter, and my stomach twisted in a knot. My students are on the other side of the world in Mexico. They don't even turn their cameras on in our Zoom meetings. How could I possibly interest them in the Easter Bunny? Not to mention the fact that Easter, with its pastel colors, its gaudy dresses, and overly sweet chocolate, is my least favorite holiday. I asked her, "Do you have Easter eggs in Mexico too?" She said, "We have colorful eggs with confetti in them that people break on top of other people's heads. We also have these fariseos that come into the town and dance, make people laugh, and wear costumes and masks. People give them money to perform." I imagine myself there on the streets of Sonora, Mexico, dancing with the fariseos. I spilled some coffee on my shirt as I rushed to unmute my microphone and tell her that I had studied dance and capoeira in Brazil. She exclaimed, "Oh, really? I've been dancing in a local troupe for years. We do traditional cultural dances." She went on to search on her hard drive for a video of their most recent performance. "That's me," she said, pointing to a petite woman in a black dress embroidered with colorful flowers. Anna danced alongside a male dancer in a cowboy hat, and they twisted and turned to traditional folk music with syncopated, energetic steps. Next, she showed me a clip of the deer dance from the indigenous tribes in Sonora, Mexico, that's performed during the period of Easter. The soft, rhythmic beating of the water drum, the shaking of blue rattles, leaves sweeping the ground, and beaded ankle bracelets that moved up and down with the rhythm of the elegant deer dancer's steps. The musicians rasped the sticks back and forth across gourds while the flute player belted out a high-pitched melody. The musicians played and sang a meditative tune while the deer dancer, hunched over, pranced elegantly through the forest, enacting being hunted and sacrificed. The male dancer, in full costume, wore a sacred mask passed down through generations with pointed antlers that spiked up past its forehead. Anna said, "Those lyrics are about the seasons and the connection to nature." Time stood still. I was transported to Sonora, Mexico in that moment, and the barriers of the Zoom screen suddenly dissolved through the enchanting sound of the water drum. Anna's face on the Zoom screen suddenly jarred me back, and I had to ask her to repeat what she had just said. She told me to write down a list of 20 questions I had about the deer dance and the Easter traditions in Sonora, Mexico, and share them with the students. And that is how this story of the cross-cultural Easter unit came about. After we had had that conversation, simultaneously I was working on this project with the University of Arizona in April of 2023, and this was part of a professional development course that I was taking with them to design a virtual field experience with the World of Experience for Language Learning, WELL. And the project comes from my work as a virtual educator with the English language programs and the U.S. Department of State. in collaboration with the Higher Normal School of Navojoa, Mexico. Like I said at the end of the anecdote there, Anna told me to write 20 questions that I had about the Easter traditions in Sonora, Mexico, and about the deer dance tradition. So I wrote these questions down in a Google document. And then I assigned those questions to the students to answer. And then they also asked me questions about Easter in the United States and Spain, which is where I currently live. Really, the unit was sort of established with this sense of curiosity, this sense of wanting to know more. And that really sparked dialogue between students and the teacher. For example, a lot of interaction between us, instead of just me kind of teaching this unit about Easter in the United States, for example, and using the U.S. as kind of the example. It was more of a back and forth conversation. And also, what was interesting about this was that I did assign students to write their questions down, but then as you can see, there's a What's Up link here. So the students then sent me their spoken questions via WhatsApp, and then I was able to answer them. So they were working on their fluency skills, working on their listening skills as well. But I think that just beginning the unit with this sense of curiosity and inquiry was a powerful stage that was set at the very beginning of this process. Rather than being something that was pre-planned, it kind of flowed organically and creatively, and then it was a way for us to open doorways of communication. And I think it could be a powerful way to create more peace and more respect among cultures, to start with these kinds of guiding and essential questions when you're studying cultures and doing some sort of a cross-cultural unit. I would like to talk a little bit about the idea of stereotypes. When we study culture, oftentimes, we may reinforce stereotypes, or teachers may present a very static view of culture, or they may just present, certain types of food or clothing. And some of these units can present culture in a way that may reinforce discrimination or bias. And I wanted to put this picture here because when I was studying Native American history in middle school, the textbook often presented images like this. And then when I searched culture on Canva, these are some of the images that came up. So you think we're making so much progress after all of these years, but really sometimes we still may have very slanted views of particular cultures. So I wanted to present this article that Dr. Ramin Yazdanapana wrote in 2019, where he talks about a cross-cultural unit that he carried out, which was a project-based learning with his students in Vietnam. And he really was able to go beyond the surface knowledge, right? Beyond just the food and clothing, and look at culture at a deeper level with his PBL unit. And I love the examples that he presented, because he talked about how what we really want to create that sense of critical thinking among our students, and helping them be able to think about their own culture, but then also cultures beyond their own, and be able to communicate and interact with people in a more respectful way. So I think that the unit that he presents was very inspiring for me as well, to think about ways that we can go deeper and reflect on culture in a more critical and comprehensive way. The first thing I wanted to say is, in terms of inquiry-based learning, the Google Doc is the most basic and simple tool, but it's very practical because you can write questions, share the questions, they can be edited, they can be added to, they can be responded to. So yes, it seems very simple, but sometimes the Google Doc has so many fantastic elements. So I use the Padlet as a tool that allowed for multimodal forms of expression. So students were able to record their voices, upload video files, and share links. And this does take you to the link of the Padlet, and you can kind of see that students, like I was also posting pictures of how we were celebrating Easter in Spain, and some different pictures from the community, some different newspaper articles, and some history of the eggs, for example. And then students were posting their questions about Spain, for example, and then we were kind of going back and forth. So it was kind of nice that I also was able to reach out to some families in the United States and ask them to share some photographs with me of how they were celebrating Easter, some traditional foods, some community events, for example, with the Easter Bunny. So this was nice to be able to connect that way. And then, these were some questions that students were asking about Easter in the United States, and then these were, Anne's questions about Easter in Sonora, and then they were putting up a lot of information with pictures of how they were celebrating it in their communities, and the fariseos, for example. Okay, so the Padlet was a really nice way. It was kind of like the base, the foundation of where we were sharing ideas and information as well throughout the unit. Now, I was also experimenting with ThingLink as an immersive interactive tool, and this is a platform that offers teachers great flexibility and creativity in design, and it can facilitate a more hands-on interactive learning experience. So ThingLink is what we were using with this project as our professional development kind of experimentation. There are a lot of tools like this, but ThingLink has a lot of flexibility and a lot of capabilities for design for teachers. So students can kind of explore these different regions and these different areas. So they could click on one of these links and then go in and to these certain hotspots and maybe listen to music or see some photographs or, certain foods, and then click on the link to read more, for example. And I think the students really enjoyed looking at the different Easter celebrations in this way. It was very immersive for them, and it was more real than, for example, looking at a textbook of some images of how people were celebrating Easter. Then I also did use I used Flipgrid as a tool where students could respond to prompts using video and audio. So they were reading a poem about Easter and then recording their responses, and then there was a creative extension as well. So it gives students a lot of capability for background music, adding images, recording from the phone, for example. And it's just a really comprehensive and wonderful tool that really allowed us to reach our objectives, our language learning objectives. So I wanted to go into the framework for the cross-cultural unit and talk about some theories that guided this unit. First of all is the idea of funds of knowledge, looking at what the community, all of those cultural assets that can connect school and community. And I bring up an example here of Amanti and Neff in the book Funds of Knowledge, how they talk about how just something as unremarkable as seeing a child selling candy could really be the topic of a unit, and that it comes from the lived experiences of the child. So making it so relevant, and I think the fact that the students were sharing a lot of this cultural information, it was very, very engaging for them to talk about their traditions and share them in the unit. A sense of inquiry. I mentioned this at the beginning that one of the key pedagogical choices I made at the beginning of the unit was to create the space for students to ask questions, and the fact that inquiry-based teaching stimulates more in-depth learning, more autonomy and engagement with the curriculum. I definitely believe in this. If I had started the unit but just by saying, okay, now we're going to learn about Easter in the United States, and just basically present them with a lot of research and ideas and pictures, and I think it probably would not have been as engaging for them, because it just really the questions wouldn't have really come from them. It would have felt more of like a banking method than a dialogue. So talking about dialogue, really this unit emerged from a dialogue that I had with Anna, my co-teacher in Mexico. And I had expected to be the teacher, but in fact, my students became the teachers through this moving and magical cultural exchange that really had organically arisen from this dialogue. So if we look deeper at the idea of dialogue, Murray states that it's so important when working with indigenous populations to give equal weight to indigenous voices, experiences, and perspectives, to bring visibility to historically marginalized groups, and to resist power imbalances. So if we truly think about this idea of a back and forth, a conversation, that is such an essential part of creating cross-cultural exchange, understanding this idea of mutual respect and sharing. I think that it's so important to hear from our students and to listen to their stories and their voices. So that was a big guiding idea that proved to be so key in the theoretical framework of this unit. Also, with multimodal responses, the unit really incorporated a lot of creative and multimodal opportunities for students to respond and to interact with the material. And so Mills and Doyle talk about how multimodal literacy pedagogy, how important it is to be sensitive, that it's culturally aware, that they emphasize the importance of honoring the multimodal aspects of representation with indigenous identity and educational practices. So I think that this idea of multimodality, especially when working with indigenous populations, is key, and it's important as well, so that students can express themselves in multiple ways and share information in multiple formats. And then also, I think being a reflective practitioner is so important, because as a teacher, it's necessary to reflect on where we come from, our identities, our beliefs, our assumptions, and this can be really key in shaping how we teach and what we bring to the table. So always reflecting on this. And even after I've looked at the unit, and I'll be teaching it again this year, there's many things that I want to change about it as well. And making those decisions and making those changes, I think, will help open more spaces for our students to be more creative, for example. Sharing beyond, I put this here because this is an example of how I was creating some higher order thinking skills. We were comparing Easter in Spain with Easter in Mexico. And I think this was a way that students could build awareness of one of their own cultures while recognizing some cultural differences or cultural similarities. So in this article, we have Biram, Grybkova, and Starkey mentioning the fact that it's important to resist the slanted perspectives and to build intercultural competence by kind of giving voice, giving multiple perspectives, and also taking into account the shifting identities. And that's why I think I wanted to bring in as much authentic information as I could, and photographs from the traditions in real time, rather than something that was kind of frozen in time. Okay, so that's kind of, I think it made it showed more of the identity of the traditions and the people who participate in the traditions. In conclusion, I wanted to say that the Easter unit was a dynamic cross-cultural exchange, moving away from a static, pre-planned approach. Also, student engagement and participation were enhanced through the use of online tools like Padlet and ThingLink, facilitating dialogue and information exchange. And finally, embracing this flexible, interactive style of learning fosters deeper understanding in complex, ever-changing cultural landscapes, benefiting both teachers and students alike. And here are the sources that I drew upon for this presentation. Thank you all for your attention and for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and that you can get some both pedagogical and theoretical ideas to guide your upcoming units.